that I'll read from, but as we talk afterwards, I'm happy to veer in one direction or another. And given the wide berth of the topic, I took the liberty of interpreting the question just in my own little mind, so you have me unfiltered. And generally, I would like to start something like this with a reading or a prayer, but I couldn't find just the right thing. That's maybe my Episcopalian waywardness. So instead, I wanted to share with you some lyrics that have been in my head for the past week. I won't sing them for you. I'm sure it's something for you to be grateful for. I won't sing them, but there are lyrics from a song that's been in my mind all week from Godspell. I don't know how many of you know that musical. I'm a musical fanatic, and I like it as a person of faith, but also as a musical. And the song Beautiful City has been on my mind a lot in the last several weeks. I just wanted to read these words from it, and I've probably taken some liberties with the lyrics, so forgive me. Out of the ruins and rubble, out of the smoke, out of this night of trouble, can we see a day of hope? Hope that one day we can build a beautiful city. We may not reach the ending, but we can start slowly and truly mending, brick by brick and heart by heart. Now, maybe now, we start learning how we can build a beautiful city. Yes, we can. I think that song has been on my mind because I love it, and because I've really been trying hard within myself and in conversations with others to keep making a case for hope. And that to me is very much entwined with the subject matter for this evening. I do indeed believe we will make progress toward a new justice in 2021. And so what I want to offer up is a general case for hope and a general suggested prescription for the role that we each play in that, no matter who we are or what we do or what our work is or isn't. So here it goes. I'll start with a brief recap story of something that happened at N Street Village over the last several weeks, and Eveline knows this story. I was at a meeting with the leaders of our programs on January 8th, Friday, and that was 2 days after the insurrection attempt. And the workers who had been at the shelter were recounting what it had been like on that day. And they talked about the fact that rioters had walked past the front of the shelter, walked on the street in front, and had called out racial slurs to the staff and the residents who were outside. And then they talked about what they did, and they talked about encouraging everyone inside, turning the televisions off, to not watch the news, but to watch movies instead. And they talked about working very hard to project a sense of calm and composure in a fearful moment. And they also made it important to say that this is primarily a group of African-American women who are telling this story. They also talked about what it was like to leave that shift, and what it was like to be no more in service as a part of their job, and to feel the upwelling of their own emotions as they left. And then there was just a generous amount of support given for each other throughout that meeting and at the end of that meeting. And it was just became a moment of genuine support that had a hint of joy in it, which I found pretty remarkable. And so I wrote something about that time in which we have shared and is posted on our website. Maybe some of you have seen it, but I offer up the story because I think that it's, in some ways, it's a parable, that what we each think of, that what we can each do in this moment, in these very vivid moments, may seem small, but in fact may not be at all. It may be the most important thing that we can do, both because, for one thing, is it not a measure of nonviolent resistance to respond the way the women did? Is it not love driving out hate in that moment? One woman on the call remarked to one of her colleagues that it was a direct repudiation of hate, the way that they had managed the situation. So I think that it's a teaching about living out each moment, that no matter the circumstances or how significant the moment or the task seems, but living out each moment as our better angels would have us do. Or as my partner's t-shirt says, as the person that your dog thinks you are. So many moments of the day, for most of the us, that's really simply being with the person beside us in recognition of their full dignity and with empathy for them, no matter who they are. I also think of this story as more proof positive to a part of my conviction in this moment that systemic racial injustice is the central issue of our day. I think its tentacles are wound around everything we could talk about as a significant social issue, from childhood education to lifetime health outcomes, and that all of our afflictions are amplified within it. There was talk on that insurrection day about how people had come for hand-to-hand combat. And in my mind, I've just been thinking about the notion of this being a hand-to-hand justice movement, justice seeking and justice giving. It gets back, I suppose, to the notion of, in each moment, simply giving justice to the person right next to us. It's what we call at N Street Village hallway justice, everyday justice, interpersonal justice. That is something that I have learned to expect of myself and what I see in others in our community in N Street Village. And I think it's a kind of a reflexive second sight that becomes a gift, a curiosity and an empathy for the experience of an other, no matter who the other is. However, getting back to why it's necessary to make a case for hope, I don't want to leave unacknowledged the fact that this time has been really devastating and disorienting and frightening. And we're clearly living in a very historic moment, and that it has felt to have an existential threat to many in this moment. And I say that on so very many levels. Certainly, from the racial justice angle, I'm a part of many conversations where I hear the element of existential threat in the conversation. But I also say this as somebody who's living with my twin 23-year-old biracial daughters who are way woke, and also, as I call them, eco-terrorists who are concerned about planetary survival in a way that my 54-year-old self was not before living with them. So they had caused me to examine myself down in many ways, down to the question of why I don't compost, which I have a feeling I will be soon doing. So in an existential threat moment, it's easy to lose hope. And I'll get wonky for a minute with data points, which may not feel hopeful, but stay with me. Homelessness, which of course is a focus of our advocacy at N Street Village and of my advocacy, is at its root an economics issue. It is the ultimate story of systemic oppression and compounded losses. It is, as I said before, its tentacles are everywhere around the social issues that we care about. In the last 10 years, here's what I can tell you about homelessness in the United States, and maybe I can't remember, Ashley, if I mentioned these numbers before when we last time, but they're worth repeating. In 10 years from 2009 to 2019, our national count of the number of people experiencing homelessness on any given night was somewhere between 630,000 and 569,000. But the lower number is 2019. But as you can see, as on an order of magnitude, that is not a ton of progress for 10 years. And when you think about all of the enormity of the resources that are thrown at this issue, clearly not enough, and there are some efficiency issues in there too. But and in Washington, D.C., here, between those same 10 years, we went from counting on a single night. Remember, these are not annualized numbers, they're point in time snapshot numbers. We went from between about 6,200 to about 6,500, up and down. So again, progress has not been swift. Also, overall, if you want to talk about then the racial disparities, homelessness in the country, about 49% of the people who experience homelessness are white, about 40% of the people who experience homelessness identify as Black or African American. In case you're interested, 22% for Latinx. And 3% for Indigenous persons, Native Americans. But the disparity is that 13% of the US population is Black or African American compared to 40% of those who are homeless. Here in DC, Black or African American folks, people identify at 48% as compared to 88% of persons experiencing homelessness. So this is clearly, we can see race right inside those figures, quite obviously. So where is the hope in all of this? Here's my case. While all of this is true, and it is on, for one thing, it's on vivid display for us these days. Many of the things that are our isms over the past several years, I think were given permission to out themselves. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because we know what we're dealing with. I feel in some ways like we are like an addict who has hit bottom. I feel like we've begun to admit to ourselves that there might be a problem, whether it's race or income equality or democracy, whether we're traveling even just in several months from George Floyd to the pandemic inequity, health-related inequities to insurrection. It does feel like we could be hitting bottom. Let us pray. So I think, because bottom is the place from which all new things are possible. And our first step is simply to acknowledge where we are and what is true in our history and in our present and in ourselves. I hear a lot of truth-telling going on these days. This is my case for hope, whether it's the 1619 Project, or we're all reading Isabel Wilkerson, or even the executive orders that President Biden signed today that were all focused on racial justice. and from my CEO perspective, dealing with the corporate community, the foundation community, donors, um, my colleagues and a lot of our boards, the media, there's an awful lot of talk about racial injustice taking place. I think we have hit a point of no return. I think we've shattered the glass on white fragility. I think we're in a new conversation. I'm fast forwarding, Ashley, because I see the time and I want to be respectful. So I guess I will end by saying that I think at N Street Village that we have either stumbled upon or been graced by an example of what is possible with regard to racial healing. I think we've been given a chance to experience at least one of its most powerful antidotes, which is community, the creation of deliberate community, which is what you all have here, of course, and what I hope you've experienced in former days and will again in future days at N Street Village. And proximity, living in proximity or working in proximity with the other. Again, however it is we define the other, but in particular at N Street Village, I think that's been a powerful lesson in racial healing. Trust me, I can tell you on a personal note, I came to N Street when I was 35 years old in 2003, and I am not the same person that I was then. I feel myself changed by this community that I'm a part of. It has been an education, sometimes difficult, sometimes joyful, and it continues to be. So, but it does take a village to create that possibility. And I'll circle back to the beginning and thank you all for helping to make that village possible and say again, I hope that's been part of your experience there too, or will be in the future. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Schroeder. We do have some questions, so I'll just go ahead and start with the ones that are in here. From the perspective of your experience at N Street Village, what policy funding actions do you advocate from local government and from Biden's administration to better support those who are homeless?
First and foremost, we're going to need relief from the economic impact of the pandemic on Black and Brown communities. That I think is fundamental. So eviction prevention, eviction moratoria, rental assistance, the expansion of unemployment benefits and food stamps, a lot of which is taking place, will take place. We have signs that will take place, some of which is taking place locally. That is, I think, fundamental. And then I think, you're looking at everything from zoning laws to criminal justice system reform to, ideas that may seem way out, and I'm not saying I advocate them, but I think they deserve consideration. Things like universal basic income or reparations or other types of rebalancing of our economics.
In your opinion, what would it take to dramatically reduce the number of homeless in the DC area? Funding, programs, what do you think is needed?
Well, it's all of the above. Part of it is definitely more resources. Some of those resources relate, however, to the ways that we, as I said before, to other things like zoning laws. For instance, I forget how much of our Northwest wards, but a great proportion of our Northwest upper northwest wards are zoned for single family housing as compared to the density in other parts of the city. Things like that are the stuff that we're not tackling that alone. The many cities and jurisdictions are tackling that. So it certainly would take more resources, and it would take those types of changes. And again, also, I think we have to think about community safety.
Margie, does that answer your question about zoning? Margie had asked to get a little more
Yes, it
information
does.
about. Okay. All right, good.
Thank you. Mhm.
Yep. Can you talk a little bit about prevention efforts for homelessness, or is there
Yes.
your perspective on that?
Yes. Prevention efforts for homelessness are generally, we have them in DC, and there are, I mean, if you're interested in knowing what the contact information is to spread in the community, be happy to share that afterwards. But there's a emergency rental assistance program, ERAP, which is commonly used. ERAP has been expanded in DC. There are also homelessness diversion programs, which can be controversial, but the goal is to assist people in figuring out other ways of staying basically stably housed while they figure out, permanent housing.
I just have a question. I think you may know we have a pretty active migrant team where we accompany some families, and housing definitely is the number one issue that we face. And so I guess and I'm sure this is the same thing for people who've lived here for a long time. We don't even know how to access some of the services. And, we have spent probably the past year building resources, and it really is hard to navigate a system. And I feel like that must be the same whether you were born in DC or, just were granted asylum. But I guess, what are some of the systems that need to be improved or streamlined that we could maybe influence when you're talking about advocacy?
Well, you're 100% right that navigating the systems is a huge part of the problem, whether it's dealing with the landlord and the property management and their requirements, whether it's getting your social security card replaced. We have a lot of folks who, their basic documents are something that they haven't been able to keep with them, or get stolen or get lost, or, this is that type of system navigation, or the disability system. Most people who apply for disability get rejected the first time around, et cetera. There are experiments in other cities with doing things that improve efficiency. And to be honest, the pandemic has forced us into some little types of efficiencies that we might hold on to. I'll give you like one very small example, which is that every time we place somebody, so N Street Village has 6 different permanent supportive housing locations, and every time somebody moves into a permanent housing location, there are a series of steps that have to happen, some of which we control, some of which we have no control over, and some of which there are various parties who have control over. One of which is the DC Housing Authority. And they are required, for one thing, to do a unit inspection. Well, I'll skip the part about how those unit inspections can be slow in actually coming to pass, but say that one innovation from this time has been remote inspections, which in theory would allow us to do inspections more quickly. Or in other cities, they're experimenting with things like digital wallets that keep people's information in the cloud so that it's always accessible and hopefully secure, so that even if you had somebody who's sleeping on the street or sleeping in a shelter and loses an ID, et cetera, you've got continual access to those types of things. We're not quite there yet in DC, but that's the kind of thing I think we should all be looking at.
Thank you. Let's see, Ellen. Is affordable housing in DC really affordable and accessible to people re-entering the workforce and working for barely more than minimum wage?
No. No.
Do you feel
No.
that the DC government is too kind to developers rather than really focusing on affordable housing?
I'm not so quick. I see a lot of gray where it comes to our government partners. I don't feel like it's all on our government to have to incentivize developers to do the right thing. And it isn't on every developer to have to be, answer an enormous need in affordable housing. But what's true in DC is true elsewhere. Again, it's an economics problem. We don't own this problem in DC. This is a nationwide problem. Wages and housing costs are out of whack. They're out of whack, and they're out of whack, especially for people who are in low skill labor or who are in low paying work. And gentrification that's taken hold in major cities, et cetera. When I visit friends and I visit my family, I would certainly see this other places as well. We are not alone. We were very well funded in the Housing Production Trust Fund and the Department of Housing Community Development pre-pandemic. And our government partnerships were a part of what enabled us to partner with developers to quadruple our housing over the past decade. So I don't see it as all about the government's ills. Are they sometimes too friendly to developers? Probably. Are probably developers sometimes, not tending to the system in ways they should be? Yes, probably.
So I had one person say maybe you could talk a little bit more about N Street Village, who you serve, for those that aren't familiar. I apologize, I didn't do a good intro about that part of it, but could you just share a little bit about N Street Village?
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I would have started there. I apologize. And Street Village started 50 years ago as an interfaith project. In fact, it was called Project, which was to stand for Protestant, Jewish, Catholic, and I was never really entirely sure what the T was at the end. But it started out just as a soup kitchen, essentially in the 1960s after the riots. It was a time not dissimilar probably from this, when people felt and saw the turmoil of the moment very immediately in front of them. And DC and the 14th Street corridor, where Luther Place Memorial Churches, were one of the affected areas. And a group of interfaith folks collected themselves at Luther Place Church there and determined that they felt called by their various faiths to answer the need that was right in front of them. There had been the riots after Dr. King's assassination. The crack epidemic was blooming in that area. Deinstitutionalization of people who had been in public psychiatric institutions, et cetera. There was a lot that was contributing to what was there. I did not live in DC at the time, but and so, long story short, the mission came together before we ever had a location. The mission started literally in the back of the church when they pulled the back pews out and let people sleep in the back of the church. Several decades later, and a capital campaign later, and they opened our first building, which in 1997, which is at 14th and N Street. Now, some of you may have been to that location, which is our largest, and that was our first and what we now refer to as our flagship. Since then, I came in 2003 and we were just at that building at that time. And then in 2010, after the economic difficulties of those years, we knew that we were faced with the twin challenges of more need and potentially fewer resources. And we set out on a growth initiative, which really we have stayed focused throughout that time on solutions, permanent solutions for women experiencing homelessness. And of course, housing solves homelessness. So our goal was we became sort of a small D developer of housing. We work in partnership with other nonprofit with other developers of affordable housing. And we also own a couple of our own buildings, and we have 6 permanent housing locations. And now we also have 2 shelters. We've had 1 shelter for 4 years in downtown in Chinatown, and we opened a second shelter in Ward 5 this just in November. We think this might be just a hypothermia shelter, which would mean November 1 to March 1, which is hypothermia season, during which time DC has a legal right to, a legal commitment to house anyone experiencing homelessness. However, all of us are concerned about the potential for the eviction cliff that I mentioned and probably did not explain very well, that, we have an eviction moratorium that is and stays with us here through the end of the public health emergency. And in DC, we have an extra 60 days until that for the moratorium to stay in place. So end of the public health emergency plus 2 months, basically. But after that point, those 40,000 households that have been hanging in the balance in DC, could potentially become vulnerable.
How much do various nonprofits coordinate on problem solving and homelessness housing amongst themselves and also with the DC government?
Really depends on which nonprofits. There are probably 8 to 10 of us who are the most involved. We tend to be larger, and frankly, that is a capacity issue. We have the ability to give it more time. We have more humans and more human hours to go to be a part of the DC's Interagency Council on Homelessness, et cetera. Also, I will say that over the past decade, we've been required by HUD, and we're grateful to comply. It was part of what communities wanted, was to coordinate better on our data and matching for people to move from housing to homelessness. So for instance, everyone who comes to N Street Village and is currently homeless comes to one of our shelters, or when our day center was open, came to our day center, and they filled out a form indicating what their needs were. And if their needs were housing, it goes into sort of a data repository, if you will. And then we have community meetings amongst the providers so that we can raise our hand and say, we have 2 spaces available in our housing for women with AIDS, let's say, or HIV AIDS, or we have housing available for women interested in addiction recovery, or just generally. So there's that coordination as well. And as I say, also at the Interagency Council on Homelessness, which has a lot of the provider organizations participate. I think technically there are something like 48 of us or somewhere near there, but some of them are small and you would not necessarily have heard of them, but yeah.
Could you talk about the intersection of mental illness and homelessness and what can be done to help people who are chronically homeless because they are mentally ill?
That is complicated, and it's something actually that is close to my own heart, having started out as a social worker and having started my career in the old state hospital system in Massachusetts a long time ago, and working with a lot of folks who were often experienced homelessness and had chronic mental illness. So mental illness has lots of different definitions, obviously, and its relationship in its various forms to homelessness is both cause and effect, right? So it would be natural to be depressed if one is experiencing homelessness. Homelessness itself can even be traumatic for people. Um, Also for women, and trauma, again, which is certainly a mental health issue, is something that we see as nearly universal for the women that we serve. It could have been child, childhood trauma, adult trauma. Being on the street makes women more vulnerable to violent events. If substance use disorders are mixed in with that, the likelihood of, being victimized is even higher. So, and then there is the issue of folks who have what we consider severe and persistent mental illness, who have something like a lifetime schizophrenia, et cetera. And we definitely have some folks who in the homeless system who are disabled by virtue of severe and persistent mental illness. And it does relate to chronic homelessness. It also relates sometimes to street homelessness as opposed to sheltered homelessness. We work hard to make sure there's a shelter bed for everybody who needs it in DC and elsewhere. But for a lot of folks with paranoia, they don't necessarily feel comfortable coming in. It also relates to family disconnection. A lot of folks with serious mental illness often become disconnected from their families for lots of reasons. It could be a symptom of the mental illness. They don't believe their family is really who they say they are. It could be that their families have been, kind of given up on a situation that has been unchangeable. So there's definitely a relationship. It is not a primary driver. Let me say that it's a smaller percentage of people, but it does relate specifically, as you say, to chronic homelessness.
Thank you. Eric would like to know if you are seeing signs of the city getting the COVID vaccine out to the homeless yet? And if so, how is that going?
We have a meeting on Monday, I think. We've had a couple of preliminary meetings with our city partners and the emergency shelter providers. Well, I guess all providers, emergency shelters providers will go first, and that Catholic Charities and N Street Village are the two groups that provide emergency shelter in DC. And the expectation is that during the month of February, we will be able to offer vaccines to the residents and the staff of our shelters. And that's very, very good news. I'm hopeful.
You alluded to it earlier about some lessons learned from COVID. Is there anything, I mean, you mentioned just about the inefficiencies. Are there other lessons that led to some of the hope you talked about earlier that COVID, the pandemics have provided you this past year?
Well, I guess I would go back to my point about it being clarifying. COVID's been in the sense of opening our eyes to inequity, for one thing, that's something that's come out of it that I hope we will keep as part of our mindset going forward. There have also been, I am certain that a lot of us who have offices and pay for a lot of office building space. We'll question whether we really need it in the future and whether we can do any sharing of costs, or, or paring down, maybe better said, sharing space and paring down of costs. There have been some small examples. For instance, we have learned that some of our trauma survivors have felt more willing to engage with their workers via telehealth than they had before. And so it seems perhaps there's a measure of comfort in connecting in a telehealth, in the safety of a telehealth type of way. I could probably think of others, but that's what's on my mind.
Thank you. We both alluded earlier to the Ignatian Spirituality Project. Can you talk a little bit about the benefit of that program to your residents?
Well, I can probably say what I observe a little bit, but I might even ask if Eveline might be willing to speak to it from, she knew where I was going with that. It might be willing to speak to it from a participant perspective. So I know of this program both because people from my church, St. Columba's, participate in it. And I know because folks from N Street participate, and because of Holy Trinity. And so it's from a lot of different angles, I've seen the effect that this has had on people. And I have a suspicion that this is actually another example of a place where antidotes are taking hold, or these prescriptions of proximity and community and hand-to-hand justice are happening, and that healing is happening because of people's openness and vulnerability, and true seeing of one another is taking place. I can also tell you that while I don't have any data on this, I would probably put my bottom dollar on the fact that the women who have gone through the Ignatian Spirituality Program have had, if you want to count them in this way, have had better outcomes than other women who have come through our program. That women who have it really seems like it has led to a solid foundation of a very blended spiritual recovery in a meaningful way. So I know they come back from their retreats glowing. So those are things I know. Eveline, do you want to say anything about it?
Hi. Okay. Well, I've been with the program of ISP for 12 years now, and in my thinking, and we have several other women on here also that's part of the ISP. The women that it has proven that many, as Schroeder shared, a lot of the women have an opportunity. It creates a connection, another connection for women. Women coming in through the ISP are just fresh. Most of them are new to the recovery process and have some real serious issues and problems with connecting and trusting individuals, trusting other women. That's one of their biggest pieces, trusting other women. ISP offers them an opportunity to come together with a group of women and to just be able to be comfortable to talk about what their feelings and what their concerns are, and to just be able to share themselves with each other, and they build a connection, recognizing and knowing that they're not so much alone. We meet with the women monthly. We do a Zoom meeting with them monthly, and the women that are in the transitional housing, and also other women from other programs that have gone on the retreat with us. We meet with them and we offer them an opportunity once again to just kind of share and to maintain that connection and give them some sense of a balance and being a part of. So ISP has played a major role in my life, being in recovery, and and I just keep showing up. They tell me something is going on, and I show up. And many of the women, a lot of the women that we have had an opportunity to spend time with and take on a retreat and connect with, they are also remaining connected with the group, with the team. So I'm happy to be a part of it, and I know many of the women that have gone on the retreats are happy to be a part of it. I think it's a valuable piece for the women to be able to experience this. And during this pandemic, we have been doing our best with, we've been doing everything that we possibly can to maintain that connection. So I thank you all.
Thank
I
you,
thank
Evelyn.
everyone. Yeah.
I'm trying to make sure we have a few more minutes. What are the most effective community volunteer activities to support those who are experiencing homelessness?
Well, uh, it's really, I don't know. I'm hard pressed to say one is more important than another, other than to nod to the fact that I think overall our advocacy and how we I hope for what we're able to do from from a policy perspectives is great, and I think that is enormously sort of overarching importance. But everything from the meal service to the volunteering that people do, or meal service is part of volunteering, to spreading the word, to connecting organizations, to serving on boards. I mean, there's so many ways for people to get involved. Each of our organizations usually has a way to get involved page, and that's certainly N Street Village does, and happy for you to look at that one. One of the great things to do for people to do, a really profound volunteer occasion, is usually the point in time count, which is, as I mentioned, that annualized count takes place across the whole country one given night during the winter time. And it usually happens last week across the country. In DC, it's this week, it's tomorrow night, because of the inauguration. And that we usually use volunteers from anywhere to be a part of that count, and people get oriented and trained, and there's usually a big kickoff meeting. And because we're in DC, a lot of folks come, and then you go off in your teams to survey essentially areas of the map, of the DC map, and to talk with anybody who might be cold and outside overnight. You do it overnight tomorrow night. I'm going tomorrow night with a couple of our other folks from N Street. We are not using community volunteers this year. We are only using people for risk, COVID risk protections. But in future years, that should become another opportunity, and for something for people to do again. Again, I'm hard pressed to say what is the most important. I think conversations like this are equally as fundamentally as many other things you could do.
On the advocacy side, is there any effort that N Street Village is kind of focused on right now that would benefit from a community of like-minded parishioners who would want to advocate with you?
Well, our advocacy is I'm a member of DC's Interagency Council on Homelessness, and we're just about to publish the citywide strategic plan. So back to the question of how people collaborate with one another, I think I mentioned that this is a plan that has been created by government agencies and providers and consumer advocates, people with lived experience alike. And it will soon be, it was approved, but we and it was just about to come out from the mayor's office as COVID hit. And we also pulled it back to take a second look over whether it needed a review for um, to see how well we were aligning our racial justice objectives and putting metrics to what we could with in that regard, et cetera. So anyway, it's going to come out very soon. Look for announcements in the paper, share them with your friends. Buy the Street Sense newspaper. That's a great advocacy thing to always do, and encourage your friends to buy the Street Sense. If you don't know, it's its own nonprofit, and they do a street paper. And you can, usually the cost of the paper is $1, and everything else that you give goes to the vendor. So it's a job for the vendor. Many of the vendors are also some of the writers and reporters on the stories. A lot of people with lived experience who are writing for that, often some very good information there as well. I would say that there is I guess this is such a, I hesitate to say this at this time. I am really interested in the re-energizing of an interfaith initiative around homelessness. And I know that the Washington Interfaith Network is one such vehicle. I don't know if Trinity is involved in WIN or not, but
They're actually the community guest on Thursday.
oh,
So
good.
that people can learn more about it. So we're not officially a member of WIN, but there's been a lot of interest in parishioners learning more about how we could be. So
Well, the benefits of WIN are that they're really focused on legislative agenda type of issues. And I think there's room for WIN and other interfaith initiatives in our space. But I think the activation of faith communities is going to be a part of what lifts us up and out of this time, not just with regard to homelessness, but with regard to so many other things.
we're at the hour. I know you work hard like everybody and don't want to keep you too long. Is there any kind of, I think that everybody, let's see, Barbara, you asked me. So the community is at 12:30 on Thursday, our normal kind of time. And also just since we have this prophetic women's voice tonight, remind you that the women who stay, the women who advance justice, Anne and Liz's winter session starts on Monday. They'll be talking about Sister Taya Bowman. So, all right, Schroeder, back to you. Is there anything that you want to kind of leave us with as we jump on your hopeful train?
Only my gratitude for being here tonight, for your interest in this, for listening. I only wish I'd had a chance to hear from all of you, to hear what you think, and your reactions and your involvements and all of that. Maybe some other time, but I thank you again for all that Trinity does in partnership with us, and I look forward to seeing you, I hope, in person someday. Thanks.
I have one more question for you. Sue Blaine, who's on here, who said that you met her. She's the chair of the Social Justice Committee. She asked all of us what brought us joy over the COVID year. We had a hilarious responses, some very serious but hilarious. So I posed that in honor of Sue. If there's something that brought you, it could be anything. It could be Ted Lasso. That was Sue's. You know, so if there's anything that you wanted to share with us that you read or that you saw that brought you joy.
Oh, I could say a lot of things, but I'll just tell you a silly thing that I said to my daughter at about midday today. I said, she's also working virtually from home. I said, you know, it's frightening and remarkable to me that I can manage to have about a productive workday still in my bathrobe during this time.
We might have to have the eco-terrorists do a community so they can educate us too. So I love that you call them that. So, all right.
I'd like to second what Schroeder just said. Not that I'm trying to repeat it, but learning how to work from home, how to do things virtually, how to use Zoom. how to use all different, there are so many different ways of communication now. Just think if this were 20 years ago, we would have been in trouble.
That's right. Yep, that is true.
All right. Well, thanks, Shredder. Thanks for kicking off our community series this year. And
Good night, everybody.
you're
Thanks,
always
everybody.
welcome whenever you have something you want to chat about. I would love to have you back. So it doesn't have to be a
Thank you
one-time
all.
thing.
Nice to see you.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you so
it's
much.
nice to see you.
Thank you.
Likewise, nice to see you too.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Evelyn.
Nice to
Bye,
see
Evelyn.
everybody.
Bye, Evelyn.
Bye-bye.
Nice
Bye.
to see everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, Barbara. Have a good week, everybody.
Ashley, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, always. I'll see you Thursday.